Hi everyone, I am dropping in because there has been so much space between April, when I got the all clear on 100% cancer free, and now. And there has been so many beautiful conversations about what it's like to be on the other side of a stage 4 cancer scenario, where everything in your life leads up to a possible death and then you don't die. So I want to talk about that. It's a completely unique subject, which I don't know I've ever heard anyone speak about before. But I want to speak about what it's like to not die. And to do that, I have to speak about what it was like to let go of life. And that happened for me about a year and a half ago. Let's just say last year, when one of the most profound shifts, mental shifts at least, in the cancer journey was when I realized that life and death were both beautiful. And for anybody who has had a terminal illness before or could imagine what it might be like, we always imagine that as having a terminal illness, it's about trying to avoid death. You know, obviously the first modus operandi that happens when you get told that you're going to die is that you don't want that. You don't want to die. And so you spend most of your time fighting death. And then there's another approach to cancer where you fight for life instead. So I find that most of us either slip into those two categories on the cancer journey. We're either fighting to live or we're fighting not to die. And 7 years of my life spent in that space, it oscillated. You know, sometimes I was fighting to live. And those were brilliant times. It was about finding a life worth living for, finding a life worth dying for, finding how to turn my cells on to life so they didn't have to, continue down the path or the code of what it meant to die, and to wake them up. So how do I find a life, And then there was times when it was scary, petrifying, and the idea of death was something I was not ready for, and so all my efforts into my health, etc., were all about trying to avoid dying. So it was either one of those two things, for the whole 7 years. It was always about that and the oscillation between the two. And it was tiring, to be honest. I've kind of looked around at my life after 7 years of being like that, and there wasn't that much room for anything else other than what was immediately in that equation of fighting to live or fighting not to die. And we all have different interpretations of what it means to fight to live. And for me, it was learning. That's why I did a master's degree and a Bachelor of Arts. It was, for me, my version of fighting to live was to learn and to waken my brain and open myself to the possibilities of the world, and how do we think and feel and be in the world with arts and teaching and pedagogy. And it was to parent as best as I can. And for me, it wasn't really to turn towards social relationships, except to try and let them in more. But, I'm kind of looking at my life right now, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, where did all the people go? So that's another story, but I am saying that I'm finding my way back into being more social and engaged through the sociality of finding deep friendships and connectivity. But anyway, going back to this thing about you're either fighting to live or fighting not to die. I had a big turning point this time last year when all of a sudden both of those things were dropped. Both of those things were not the formula that was carrying me anymore. All of a sudden, I didn't need to fight in order to live or fight in order to not die. It was just to not fight. And the reason it took me almost 7 years to get to that was I wasn't close enough to death, because when you truly give up the fight to live, it's a funny formula. It's a funny thing. It's a very, very unique space to be in life, especially when there's some people that have that who are close to wanting to end their own life, for example, through mental illness and or difficulty. But it's not that what I'm talking about. It's the fight to live is exhausting if living means putting in so much effort. Right? And for some of us, we don't have to put in that much effort to feel like we're living. And when you have a cancer diagnosis, you put in an enormous effort. When you have issues with your mental health, you have to put in an enormous effort, a daily effort that starts the moment you wake up, from the moment you go to bed. So it was effort. It was 7 years of effort, of constant, retrograde, humming effort, every day, either fighting to live or fighting not to die. Everything I put into my body, every thought that I had, every specialist that I saw, every decision I made. Luckily, I kept on making bigger decisions that were outside the smaller ones. So, going to university and learning and getting another degree. Thinking of changing careers, even though I didn't know if I was going to live long enough to be a teacher. Those types of things I kept on doing in order, because when I was in the mode of I'm fighting to live, I would do big things like that, because that was all a part of the equation, right? There was no point thinking I shouldn't do a master's degree now because I might die next year. That was a part of the other equation, which I was sometimes in, which is fighting not to die. Okay? So, but when I was in the modus operandi fighting to live, I kept on making big decisions as though I was always going to live. Anyway, that dance just kept on happening, and it was exhausting. Then, again, going back to this time last year, all of a sudden, those two stories stopped playing. And perhaps it's the word fight that stopped playing. I was no longer fighting to live or fighting not to die. And the dropping of the fight takes a long time to get to, because usually what people equate with a dropping of that fight to live is a giving up. And I was petrified of not having those two tensions, of not having those two fights, of not oscillating between them two. So I didn't want to give up. That meant giving up. Now, what happened in a deep meditation last year, when I was really, really getting close to a stage 4 diagnosis, which kind of is like moving yourself towards the fire. On a cold night, there's a fire burning, and you're getting closer, and you can feel the heat. It's like I was feeling the heat of getting to a stage 4 diagnosis, or to getting closer to death, right? And to the point where I couldn't deny that death was an actual option anymore. And that's when something started to change. For lots of different things started to change. First, I made a will. I ticked things off my bucket list. I got my daughter's affairs in order with her father. I prepared, because it was a real option. And how to do that without fear was a real tender thing. Because because to do those things felt like an inevitability that the death was going to happen. So it was petrifying at times. But as soon as I sort of started getting my affairs in order and inching closer to that fire and feeling the heat of death, I could no longer not really truly explore what it means to die. And I know that intellectually, many of us have probably thought about death. But the interesting thing that happened after 6 years of either avoiding it or actively running away from it, or actively, I finally, truly, authentically contemplated the reality of death. And to do that, I went into almost like a beautiful, imaginatory trance. And I really felt into what it might be like to die. And you know what? It was serene. There's no word for it. I feel like I had what people would call an NDE, without actually getting that close to death. I had gotten a stage 4 diagnosis. It wasn't a death, it wasn't dying, but I contemplated it so deeply. It's like I had an NDE, and it was like a meditation that was full of everything. It's like I was everywhere all at once, and all I remember was this brilliant coral colored light, like a sunset. Think of the most amazing sunset you've ever seen, and then times that beauty and encompassing awe by 100. And that's the meditation I had about death. And sure, there was no body anymore, and I had to let go of all the things that I'd identify as Nathalie Brewer, including being a mother, which was the hardest, of course. But all of those things didn't really go anywhere. They were just everywhere. And then what happened next was a deep, profound sense of trust. That even in the death state, there is this most incredible sense of life. In fact, ironically, even in the death experience that I had, it was the most profound sense of life I had ever felt. So, all of a sudden, it didn't matter if I healed my body or not. It didn't matter anymore. It was all okay. Die, not die. Fight for life. Try to fight not dying. It was all irrelevant. It was just is. And what I moved into, what could only be described as the present moment, that seemed to stick around like a retrograde present moment. You know, when sometimes when you bring yourself to the present moment, it just feels like a moment. They call it a moment. Well, something that happened around that time for me is that the present moment began to be a experience, like a reality, more so. So a continual reality of the present moment. It's hard to describe, but rather than experiencing life like the present moment, as though it's singular, the present moment became my lived experience in a very small, buzzing way, almost like a blowfly that's buzzing around in your kitchen. It was like that. Like the present moment was just always buzzing around me. And I always thought, oh, I wonder when that's going to go away. And it hasn't gone away. And I'm pretty sure that at that moment is when I began to heal. Now, it didn't mean, interestingly, that I didn't stop living or trying to stay alive, which I thought that's what it would mean. I always wanted to keep on fighting for life because I never wanted to stop fighting for life or trying not to die, because that was terrifying for me, because that meant I would have to give up, and therefore I could just die. But no, what actually it was after all those things were given up, it wasn't that I gave up on life at all. Actually, what happened was life rushed in, and it just stuck around. And part of living life became a practice of opening to what could only be described as that coral light that I was talking about. So I just kept on waking up every morning saying, what would that life force that's all pervading that I saw in that NDE kind of a meditation, near-death experience meditation, what would that light have me do? How would it like to move through me today? Because all of a sudden it's the only thing that I can think of that matters, is that if that is life, if that is ultimately the spindle between life and death, if that is the all-encompassing, for me that light is life and death, it's all of it. So for me, it's kind of like saying that's my God, right? So it's like that is the only thing that actually is real. That is the thing that is actually within all of us. If you even just now close your eyes and feel into your heart center core, not your emotional heart, because we know there's lots of stuff going on in there, but if you just feel for the presence of your heart center core, you will feel that there is a sense of light in there. And that light is what actually is what is in all of us. And that's what I think what the sages have been talking about for centuries, that we're all one. You know, we're all one by nature in that within our heart center core, we all have this light, this kind of like universal humming. Yeah, otherwise you'd be dead. That's what life is. You have a universal humming of life sparking through your heart center core at every moment of every day for, you know, in your life. And that's how we're all similar. And so if you let your God become that light, then you're actually just seeking out that which is in everything and in each other. And for me, I've so dropped the idea of we must realize the self, we must get to know the self, we must love the self, we must self-help, self-actualize. If we drop I'm actually finding these days that to truly, truly, truly get to know thyself is to drop the self and to be totally, utterly absorbed and interested in the light of life force in everything around you. Because it's in everything around you where you can see that light that exists within your own heart and everything else. When you see that in everything around you, I guess that is when you get to know yourself even more profoundly. Yeah, so it's in actually other people when you look for that which is the same within you, when you look for the tuning fork of that light which is in everything and everyone. That's how we get to self-actualize. We take the self out of it. Let's drop the word. That's when we just actualize. That's when life becomes something that is that's when life becomes something that just is. In that present moment that hums, right? So, since not dying, in April this year when I found out, one more backtrack. Upon entering this understanding of light and looking for it within everything, within and around, it didn't mean that I gave up on life. It meant that all I was doing was just in it. I was just in it. There was no question to keep it or not keep it. I was just in it, right? And that meant seeking for it to move through me. And how do I open myself up to that light constantly, every single day? And that included, at that time, asking, and it still does every single day, to that light, to that thing that's in each of us, what would you have me do today? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say? Because my faith is in the fact that light is self-correcting. That light has a movement toward greater expansion, and it will constantly ask us to expand in order for it to be let through. Because isn't it beautiful when you meet someone who just lights up a room? Isn't it beautiful when you meet someone who's switched on to life? You know, isn't that all we're here to do, is just become that peephole for that life to pierce through as much as possible? So how do we keep on opening to that, right? And so at that time last year, it was, what would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say? And also, what's next? If you want me to be alive, life, coral light of life, whatever you are, the thing that's within all of us, if you want me, if your goal is to live and thrive, okay, which is, it is, because it's creation, if that's the ultimate goal there, is to live and thrive and to create and to expand, how would you have me do that today? How would you have me do that today? If I'm not supposed to die of cancer, what would you have me do to stay alive today? You know, because you're the only reality. You're the only thing that actually is. So, and you're the thing that's kind of like, is kind of like, I guess, moving through us all. So, anyway, I just kept on listening to that. And I woke up one morning and said, what would you have me do today? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say, and to who? And then you just listen. So our jobs become, in order to live, we just need to become really good listeners. And isn't that the same in almost everything? In relationships, I say it's the same in life. How do you get good at listening to that light within your heart center core? Blah, blah, can sound very cliche, but let's call it life force, right? Anyway, one particular day, last September, this time I think last year, I was asking that question, and a friend of mine, Holly McAvale, said to me that she just heard of a friend who was doing this protocol called How to Starve Cancer by Jane McClellan. And as soon as she told me that, it struck a chord. Something within me, that light within, stirred, and I just knew that I had to say yes to that. That's what that light that day would have me do, because it just felt like a stirring toward it. So I did it. I just looked it up. That was just the next thing, because I was just living life according to that. And so I did it, and I continued to take chemo at the time. I think I was on the full protocol by October, November, and then by February I was 97% cancer-free. And in that time, having a stage 4 diagnosis, I also did things like get my will in order, get Winona in a position where she could be parented. I didn't know if I was going to live or die. Again, it also, all of a sudden, it was all okay. I was doing this thing in order to live, the protocol, but I was also being practical and aligning my life because anything was possible. And it was all okay. There was no fight anymore. So I think it was a combination of reaching the precipice where the fight is just no longer. I think Joe Dispenza says, when you come to a place in your healing journey where you no longer are trying to heal, or you no longer care if you are healed or not, is when the real healing begins. And that was kind of like this time last year for me. But I was still doing the actions. It doesn't mean you are inactive. It just means you no longer fight and you no longer really have an invested or an investment in the outcome. Yeah? So you take away the investment in the outcome. So that's where I was this time last year. No investment in the outcome, doing the things, following that life force that was within, because it was the only real thing. It ultimately is still the only real thing. And then, April this year, here we are, I didn't die. And so I wanted this video to be about what it's like not to die. And I would say what happened when I didn't die is that it felt like I had finished an entire life. It felt like the amount of healing that I had done in that 7 years and the striving that I had done on all levels, emotional, spiritual, physical, existential. I even ticked everything off my bucket list. It was all done. And then I didn't die. So it felt like an entire life was completed. Like Nathalie Brewer's life was completely completed. The karma felt resolved. Triggers that I would usually get from my childhood were just not there anymore. There was a pervading peace that came over everything like a blanket that made everything equal, and nothing felt spiky anymore in terms of the history of the life that I had lived. It was all very quiet. And it's been quiet all year. And I feel like I'm in this space, after you go through a breakup or you have a massive transition in your life, where you get to a place where it is so maybe painful or so profound that all of a sudden you don't know which way is up anymore. You get disorientated. They call it the dark night of the soul. And then you don't know which way to tread. It's kind of like that, but in the most positive sense. It's like I'm in this in-between, like I've finished a life and I'm incarnating into another one, but I'm still in the same body. And I don't really know which way. All I know is that because there's no agenda, there's no more what's in the future for me. I'm not looking at the future. I'm not trying to make anything happen. I'm not inching toward anything. I'm not even reaching out in terms of my social circles. So even those are just falling where they fall. I'm just kind of existing whilst listening. And in a way, that's the most profound way to go about living, because the listening is where all the living is happening. So I'm listening to the fact, like this afternoon, I was walking back from the shops in Fairfield, and there was a man sitting on a bench, staring across the road. And my inclination was like, who is that? And then I realized I'd met that person before. And so the movement within me, that coral light, said, go speak to him. And so I did. Turns out we'd met, like we'd remembered each other, and we had this beautiful afternoon talking. And he's, I can see him becoming a great friend. So that, in that way, to live a life where you're just listening, and you're just saying, what would you have me do today? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say, and to who? For me, feels like doing anything other than that feels ludicrous. It feels insane. It feels insane not to do anything other than that. So I guess the main thing that I really wanted to kind of speak to you about in this video is to talk about what it's like not to die. And you can't really talk about what it's like not to die unless you're also talking about what it's like for it not to matter. What it's like for life just to be completely present. What it's like for things to completely fall away. You think of absolutely everything you've ever been through and it's the ultimate death, right? So what it's like not to die is like everything dying. What it's like not to die is like dying, an ultimate death. And on the other side of it is ultimate life and space. And I could talk about this for the rest of the time I'm breathing on this planet. And you know what? I probably will. I'm just going to keep talking about this. If you'd like me to keep talking about this, let me know and I'll include you on my podcast. That's what I think I'm going to do next, is I just want to keep talking about this forever. Anyway, thanks for listening, and see you in the light.